Okay, so we'll start up there. And, oh, no. Minimize that. And I realize I'm not sharing my screen with you guys. No, do. Bam. Okay, Genesis 15. After these things, the word of the Lord came to Abram in a vision. Fear not, Abram, I am your shield. Your reward shall be very great. But Abram said, O Lord God, what will you give me? For I continue childless, and the heir of my house is Eleazar of Damascus. And Abram said, Behold, you have given me no offspring, and a member of my household will be my heir. And behold, the word of the Lord came to him, This man shall not be your heir. Your very own son shall be your heir. And he brought him outside and said, Look toward heaven and number the stars, if you are able to number them. If you are able to number them. Then he said to him, So shall your offspring be. And he believed the Lord, and he counted it to him as righteousness. Then he said to him, I am the Lord who brought you out from Ur of the Chaldeans. So uh, give uh, to give you this land to possess. But he said, O Lord God, how am I to know that I shall possess it? He said to him, Bring me a heifer 3 years old, a female goat 3 years old, a ram 3 years old, a turtle dove, and a young pigeon. And he brought him all of these, cut them in half, and laid each half over against the other. But he did not cut the birds in half. And then the birds of prey came down on the carcasses, um, and Abram drove them away. Then as the sun was going down, a deep sleep fell on Abram. And behold, dreadful and great darkness fell upon him. Then the Lord said to Abram, Know for certain that your offspring will be sojourners in a land that is not theirs, and will be servants there, and they will be afflicted for 400 years. But I will bring judgment on the nation that they serve, and afterwards they shall come out with great possessions. As for you, you shall go to your fathers in peace. You shall be buried in a good old age, and they shall come back here in the fourth generation, for the iniquity of the Amorites is not yet complete. When the sun had gone down and it was dark, behold, a smoking firepot and a flaming torch passed between these pieces. On that day the Lord made a covenant with Abram, saying, To your offspring I give this land, from the river of Egypt to the great river, the river Euphrates, the land of the Kenites, the Kenizzites, the Cadmonites, the Hittites, the Perizzites, the Rephaim, the Amorites, the Canaanites, the Girgashites, and the Jebusites. Okay, so um, so this chapter overall, um, uh, I don't think I've described it this way as much in a recent talk, but definitely if you go look at some of the videos that I had done in the past, I described Abram's life as kind of a 3-act play. And this is sort of the culmination or the climax point of that first act. The second climax is going to be the binding of Isaac's story, and then there's like the resolution after that when transitioning into Isaac succeeding him. Also, this is the first time that the covenant is going to be kind of formally ratified. And so this whole discussion and setup for this chapter, there's a lot going on. And there's a lot of things that I probably won't cover as well as I would like to, because there's just so much jam-packed into this. But I'm going to try and do this whole thing just today. So the first thing After these things, the word of the Lord came to Abram in a vision. So, actually, I was going to post it, and I probably still will post it. Inspiring Philosophy kind of has the sidekick guy. His name is Than, and he just came out with I think an hour or 2 hour long video, something like that, discussing pretty in depth the rationale behind why you should think that the word of the Lord here is that's not just Abram hearing like an audible voice. That is a person, and the argument is going to be that that person is something like a pre-incarnate version of Jesus. And so he goes into depth into that. I'm not going to do all of that tonight, but you can see why you should, even in this short text, you can kind of see why you would want to think that, because of because of this right here where it says, and he brought him outside, right? And so there's some mechanism by which Yahweh is bringing him outside, and then he is pointing him up towards the heavens. And so this seems, and there's going to be other references in Genesis like that. And so this seems to be, this seems to be some kind of interaction with a human-like figure. And this will be part of the case for where, whenever John calls Jesus, the Word, right? People will say that that's both a reference to the Greek understanding of the Logos, but then also to this understanding of the word of the Lord, meaning like an actual person or being that is coming and telling you what Yahweh wants to tell you. And there's a whole big discussion about that, about is this an angel or whatever, an angel being an occupation rather than an ontological name and all that stuff. But I was going to hold a lot of that discussion and not necessarily cover that here. But so I wanted to mention that, and I will try and make sure that I reference that video. The thing that I wanted to talk about is more about what's actually going on. So this prophecy: "Fear not, Abram, I am your shield. Your reward will be very great." So the thing that we need to remember about all this is that what's the context of Abram's journey so far, where he's been coming. And the last time that we talked about this, I talked about how Abram whenever he starts out, he's following the Lord, or trying to, but he is fundamentally making selfish decisions, and he's starting to, and whenever he is interacting with the Nephilim, he is using trickery to deal with them, and trying to do things to make his name great, right? Because that's what God promised him. God promised him that he's going to become a great nation. And so he's just come out of this big battle, right? And he has just refused the spoils and the rewards that right, it's the king of Sodom, I believe, that is being offered to him. And basically, right, you can imagine that after this event occurs, Abram is wondering, did I make the right decision there, right? Because I potentially just ticked off because he very purposely didn't indebted like himself to uh, to this king, right? He refused that king's offer. Therefore, he's sort of putting a target on his back, right? And he's wondering, okay, did I make the right decision? And right, so the Lord comes to him and says, "Fear not, I'm your shield, and I'm your reward. You're like you made the right decision, right?" And then Abram's response is, "What will you give me? I'm childless," right? And it's a little bit interesting because up until this point, we haven't really seen the fact that Abram as childless affecting him, right? He's had these promises previously, before he even like went down into Egypt, but we don't see this discussion about his heir, and it's really not until he actually is established and he has all of this stuff. He actually, like, before he had anything, like this promise comes to God and he's like, well, I'll take it. Well, and now he actually has something, and it's, well, oh crud. Now, like, actually, there needs to be some discussion about what's going on here. And to me, the thing that I think is interesting is that this discussion actually very much parallels a lot of the discussions that we still have today about what the nature of God's promise to Abraham is, right? And namely, the big one being like, okay, are these promises and this covenant given to actual physical, genetic, ethnic Israel, or is it given to a spiritual successor, namely Christians, right? And I don't really see how you can get around the fact that that's basically what the discussion is the heir to my house is Eleazar of Damascus. He's not a physical descendant, but he will be, and currently is the successor. Will this, and so in a sense, that is a spiritual successor, right? And he's asking, is it going to be this spiritual successor, or will you actually give me a child? And the Lord's response is, no, it's not going to be a spiritual successor. It's going to be a physical successor. And this is going to get, in a few chapters, right? This is going to get played out even more explicitly between the whole discussion of Ishmael and Isaac, and whether or not the successor is just a descendant of Abram, or is it going to be a descendant of Abram and Sarai? And to me, that's a further solidification of this idea of the actual physical intimacy and like marriage covenant and family nature matters. That it's not just do you carry the name of the group. Also want to point out, which I think this is a thing that I mentioned before, about the thing that God is saying to him specifically is, again, look outside, look toward the heavens and number the stars, if you are able to number them. and he said, so shall your offspring be. And he believed the Lord, and so shall your offspring be. So, like, this is not just it's not just a promise of you're going to have one kid or one descendant. Or it's that it's going to multiply and be more than at least you're able to count. One of the things that I want to bring up here is the fact that that this is essentially pretty much no matter how you date the Pentateuch and like the writing of Genesis, this is at least a 3,000 to 4,000 year old prediction. And whether you think it is a prediction based off of genetics or a prediction based off of cultural identity, it's still impressive either way. The reason why it's still, like, I think a lot of people, I think a lot of atheist types would be like, okay, well, it's not like an impressive thing because if anybody is related to a group in the past, like everybody's related to it. And so you could be like, oh yeah, like, you know, Genghis Khan, Pokemon. Genghis Khan has tons of descendants, right? And all these other people would have tons of descendants, but like who cares? But the thing is that that's not the way that ancients thought. Ancients didn't know about genetics. They very much thought in the mode of identity and familial relations. And you can see this in how they thought about like levirate marriage, for example, which is also something that I'm not going to go into tonight. But so if you take it as, well, it's just a prediction of genetics. Well, they didn't know about genetics, so that's still a pretty interesting prediction. And then two, to me, the thing that I think is more interesting is the fact that pretty much no group ever, other than the Jews, has had a diaspora of almost, well, 2,000 years, but actually multiple waves of diaspora, right, including the original Babylonian exile, right, and managed to maintain their cultural identity enough so that they would eventually go back to their ancestral homeland and attempt to somehow reconstitute their civilization that they had previously. No other group has managed to do that. Every other group, when they're in their phase of being conquered, they assimilate to the conquering force, whatever that may be. They don't just they don't maintain their heritage. That doesn't really happen. And so if this to me seems like it's a 3,000 to 4,000 year old prediction that they would be able to do this and that they would be a crazy high number, which is what the Jews are. So then this last part here, and he believed the Lord and it counted to him as righteousness. Yeah. A lot can be said about this. But I don't want to spend a ton of time about it. I just want to highlight it for a second. and point out the fact that the Abraham's righteousness is not based. Right, we point this out all the time. Abraham's righteousness isn't actually based off of his own inherent goodness, which is especially good for Abram at this point, because as I've tried to make out, he hasn't been all of that righteous. He hasn't been a very righteous person up until this point. But it's counted to him as, because he believes what God is saying, right? And if you go back and listen to like the Mark, when we did the Gospel of Mark, I talked more about how there's a relationship between how like there's a relationship between faith and salvation, and just recognizing the truth of the world and who God is in it. Because like I'm trying to bring to mind the discussion about the faith of the centurion, and how really that's just an acknowledgement of who Jesus is, and this is really just an acknowledgement of who Yahweh is, right? And saying like, okay, you're saying this, it's I believe you that it's true, and that that how do people sometimes put it? That the assent to the proposition, the agreeing to the proposition, is in and of itself counted as faith and counted as righteousness. Okay, so I'm going to pause there because we're already like halfway through it. Does anyone have any questions about this first portion or comments that they want to make? Okay, I will keep going then. All right. In the second portion, and he said to them, I am the Lord. Christian.
Oh, hey, Kyle.
What's up?
I was having a hard time with this. So, um, let's see. Verse 6 says, Abram believed the Lord and he credited to him as righteousness. So you kind of see like this interplay between people acting righteously and being called righteous, the Old
Yep.
Testament, and then also the Lord like I was reading in Isaiah recently, it was like the Lord clothes us in righteousness. And then you kind of see that same relationship even in the New Testament.
Oh yeah.
People tend to like to focus on just the faith aspect where it's like, and that's not to discount the faith aspect, but I feel like there's somewhat of a marriage there between Lord clothes us in righteousness. That's like the ontological reality. And then there's kind of the working it out in real time. Um, and it gets into like the whole faith and works
Yeah.
conversation
Yeah, for
and
sure.
debate, but I think that like both are essential. I would say that sometimes growing up it feels like the word works was almost like, don't say that, you don't say the word works,
Yep.
works are bad. Like, wait, what, really? Like righteous works are bad? And I think sometimes people don't realize, like, even Paul's whole argument about all of our righteousnesses as
Filthy rags. Yeah.
yeah, filthy rags. Thank you. I was gonna say bloody rags. It's like that's not right.
Well,
Oh, they're as filthy rags, and I think sometimes people, my opinion, sometimes Paul intentionally uses hyperbolic arguments to
oh
make his
yeah, for
point,
sure. Yeah.
and they don't. Paul's not like discouraging good works. It's not like don't do any good works because they're all crap anyways. And so anyways, I don't. That's the only thing I would comment on there. But that's not to take away from faith. Faith is the foundation. It's like the seed. It's the very thing that
Right.
it's the thing. It's the way that God ultimately makes you ontologically righteous so that you can work that righteousness out.
Well, and what I would argue, right, is that that very like relationship is the thing that we will see play out in Abram's life going forward, which is why I try to point out the fact that I don't really like this interpretation that a lot of times people have of just like, oh, anything that Abram does in the Old Testament is good because Abram is a righteous guy. And it's like, no, it's not. And even after this statement, Abram is going to continue to do some things that I think you can safely categorize as not righteous, right? Um, but the point is that exactly like what you said, right? Like that faith, that belief in um, who God is becomes the foundation upon which he can do righteous things. And we'll see that play out. I mean, we'll explicitly see it played out, right, with the Binding of Isaac story, which um, we're actually going to end right before we do that because that was the first one that I recorded. So you can jump ahead and actually already see the recording of that. But right, like Abram is able to do and make the righteous choices in that scenario because he has faith in who God is. And because he's already walked and seen all of the other things that God has done, right? And so the the basis for your works will be the fact that you have that you have the faith, right? Um, and I think that's the proper way to look at that relationship.
I just want to add on something here, just because I have a thought since we're really
Yeah.
focusing on it. Um, that yeah, I think you're right that this statement, I don't think necessarily you can't apply it uh like holistically even to Abraham going forward because he's going to uh expressly operate uh in ways where he doesn't fully believe
No.
um these promises. So that makes you think that it's something more about the moment
Yes.
in which he believes. And I think you can get a better understanding if you contrast it both to whenever he kind of talked back to God and tried to haggle for more people in
You're
or
going to see it in the next
for fewer people
paragraph.
in Sodom and Gomorrah, and it's also easily contrasted with like Moses' encounter with the burning bush, where in that instance there's a lot of self doubt applied to why he goes, well, hold on, that doesn't won't really work because of this, and I need more conditions because of that. And what you don't see here is there is no like rebuttal on this from Abraham. It's I'm gonna take it's a faith that overcomes cynicism and self doubt to take on faith the the covenant as is. Now, arguably, he's asleep at this moment, so
Yeah,
maybe you'd
I mean,
say he
like,
can't. But
well, what I'm saying is like even like verse 8, right? He says, "Oh Lord, how am I to know that I shall possess it?" Right, and it just 2 verses previously it says he
yeah,
believed the Lord, right? So there's very clearly some
mhm,
disconnect between how a lot of people want to understand that verse of he believed the Lord and all this. Like it's not a total comprehension and understanding. Like it can't be. like
yeah.
like that can't be what it's arguing for and or what it's describing. Um okay. And since we're there and this kind of segues into it, right? Um one thing that I want to point out here is where it says, and I am the Lord who brought you out of Ur of the Chaldeans. I think it's important to notice how right we've been talking about or I've been mentioning little mini fractal stories, and we already had like Abram had his little mini portion where he goes down into Egypt, and then he comes and he's like a servant for a time, and then he comes back out with possessions, and right and then even with this, it says like, I am the Lord who brought you out of early Chaldeans. Whereas in the future, right, to the people that are the audience for this, the thing that God's going to constantly say to them is, I am the Lord, your God, who brought you out of Egypt, right? And it's important to understand like the relationship between, especially whenever we talk about salvation, it's important to understand that the salvation, the thing that he is giving them, is this bringing out and into a new land. Like that is like the relationship between like the God of your salvation is connected to the God who brought you out of the land that you knew previously into the new land that you're going to possess. Like that is a really fundamental connection, right? And then his question is, well, how will I know that I shall possess it, right? So again, it's the question about what he talked about before, right? How will I guarantee that I will possess this land and not a spiritual successor, right? Because before, the question is about, is it going to be Eleazar, or is it going to be my own son? Is it going to be the spiritual successor that's following me after in name, or is it going to be my actual successor? And he's like, well, how will I know that I shall possess it, and it won't just be someone in my name? Which is a very which is a question that I don't think modern people think about. But it's this connection to family that I don't think we fully have in the modern world, and I think we should.
Well, that's a concern that even the Romans didn't have, because
Right.
Caesar is willing to be like, all right, I adopted you as my son, you're Caesar, like that'll be
Right.
the way it goes, and that's good enough.
Exactly.
Or at least you could
And it turns
claim
out
you
it
made
wasn't good
that
enough.
idea. Right. Yeah.
And so okay, and so then that's and so the thing that I want, so okay, so we're just discussing this, we're pointing it out, right? So that's Abraham's question is, what's my guarantee, right, that I will possess it? And notice that God's answer is, okay, I'm going to set up a covenant. And also notice that the covenant, again, fractal stories, miniature stories, the covenant takes time to set up. And the thing that, in the way that we know that it takes time to set up, is twofold. One, when the birds of prey came down to the carcasses, Abraham drove them away. So they're out there for a while, at least for enough time for birds of prey to come and try and eat the carcasses. And two, as the sun was going down, a deep sleep fell upon Abram. And so there's a transition of time frame, right? And so the guarantee of the promise is going to take some time to set up, which is exactly what ends up happening with it takes some time to set up the covenant, right? Not just the covenant that he's doing right here, but the greater covenant that the text is talking about, the covenant at Sinai, right? And then I could think, and I think you could expand that out to, it's going to take some time to get to the new covenant, right? Like there's this relationship with time and this establishing of covenants that's taking place.
Hey, on that note, not
Yeah.
to cut you off, but I had somebody say to me one time, because it's been kind of a hot topic, I feel like, is like, this topic of Jewish people and what's supposed to happen with them. And somebody said to me, like, so you believe like they're gonna possess the land, and I was well, I do tend to believe that because there's whole lot of prophecy about it,
There's a
and
lot.
there's like a lot. So, I mean, unless I'm prepared to allegorize all those passages, which I find kind of difficult because some of them are pretty explicit. But anyways, they said, well, why haven't they possessed the land then? God promised it to them. And I pretty much said what you're saying right now, which is like, when have God's covenants ever been immediate?
Yeah.
Like, they've always taken time, every single time.
Yeah.
So, anyways, just
You
figured
you
I would.
you could you could make you could like actually I would argue that most of the Jews at the time were making a similar argument to Jesus when he was walking on when he was here. Like, Lord, why isn't the kingdom of God right here right now? He's like, well, it is, but like it also was gonna take time, right? Like, sorry, like this is how God seems to do things. Um, the other thing that I wanted to talk about is what the heck is going on here? What is this kind of covenant ritual? So this is an ancient Near Eastern like blood covenant, and essentially what it is the idea. And I also want to say this: the difference between a covenant and a contract is the fact that a contract is enforced by governmental law, and a covenant is enforced by supernatural powers. It's the really, as far as I can tell, that's the only difference between a covenant and a contract, right? Covenant is you go to a judge or a law and they like enforce it. A covenant is enforced by supernatural powers, and usually it is enforced by the gods of the two parties that are making the covenant. That's how they're structured at every level, from low level, which there are low level covenants made in Genesis between uh, Jacob and Laban, for example, and up to like your whole suzerain vassal treaty covenants that people talk about with like I think like the Hittites and some other groups or whatever, right? In all of those cases, the way that it works is that we make a deal, and then basically what you do is you say, my gods are going to ensure that I uphold my end of the deal, and your gods are going to ensure that you uphold your end of the deal. And so what you're doing in this ceremony is basically, as you walk through the animals that are cut in half, as you walk through the sacrifices, basically you say the oath or the covenant of whatever it is that you're agreeing to, and what you're saying is, if that thing does not happen, if I do not uphold my end of the deal, then I should be punished for not upholding my end of the deal. That's what a covenant is. Okay. And I guess since I'm on this point, I'll go ahead and talk about this whole thing in general, because in relationship to this whole argument about like will like it does it still apply to Israel or whatever, or has it passed on? One of the biggest proponents of it, I don't remember what the guy's name is. I could go find him. But his main argument for what, so there's the argument that comes up is, are there conditional versus unconditional covenants? And the thing that this guy argues, again, if I had done better, I would have gotten his name. He tries to argue that all covenants are conditional, even whenever covenants are not specifically mentioned. And the problem that I have with that in this case is, first of all, you made up that rule. That's not an actual rule that exists in the world. But two, we have a verse in this passage that demonstrates that actually this covenant is unconditional. What verse is that? It's verse 17. When the sun had gone down and it was dark, behold, a smoking firepot and a flaming torch passed between these pieces, right? And so I'm skipping the previous chapter so that I can keep these connected ideas or not the previous chapter, the previous paragraph, so that I can keep these ideas connected. The thing that's going on here, right, is the smoking firepot and the flaming torch are the presence of God, right? It is God who passes through the pieces, and he says the covenant as he's going through. And it says, that's what it says. And on that day, the Lord made a covenant with Abraham, saying, to your offspring, I will give the land and do all this stuff. So very specifically, the things that we need to notice here is, A, the parties of the covenant are not God and Abraham. The parties of the covenant are God and God. God is both sides of the covenant, which means that fundamentally it has to be an unconditional covenant to Abraham. Like, because Abraham, technically speaking, isn't even in the covenant. Abraham can't break the covenant. He didn't go through the covenant. The covenant was made on both sides by God. He can't break it. Okay? And what is the covenant for? The covenant is for, very specifically, that they get this tract of land, right? One of the things that I was going to put up here is there's a lot of debate about what specifically this land entails, because if you interpret the river of Egypt as the Nile River, it makes it so that it makes it so that the amount of land is like crazy large, is much larger than modern day Egypt. But there's a lot of arguments that the land probably corresponds actually to the maximum amount of size that like Solomon ever had control over. Which again is funny to me, because that's one of people's ways of showing that, like, oh, see, there's not really prophecies. This prophecy was written to validate Solomon's like kingdom, right? Except for that, like, a lot of it has happened, which still makes it a roughly 3,000-year-old prophecy. And so, yeah. And so, to me, this whole discussion about, like, should it be spiritualized and should it be, or should we understand it as applying to, like, the actual Jews? I think that you're allowed to say that, yeah, in some ways we can spiritualize these promises and these understandings because we have New Testament verses that allow us to do something like that. But the ability to spiritualize it and broaden it out is based on the fact that God did uphold this covenant, right? It's based on the fact that this event that is taking place here, that God upheld, that his offspring would be given the land from the river of Egypt to the river Euphrates and all of that stuff, right? And so, yeah, I think I've made my point with that one. The other thing that I want to mention here is that the smoking fire pot and the flaming torch are pretty clearly miniature versions of the pillar of cloud and the pillar of fire that is going to be representative of God during the Exodus story, right? And so you have these smaller images of the things that Moses' audience are like experiencing. That's what's going on here. That's one of the ways that we also know that. Okay, yeah, these two symbolic entities are supposed to be references to God's presence. So kind of the last thing that I want to talk about is this portion here where it says, "Know for certain that your offspring will be sojourners in a land that is not theirs, and will be servants there, and they will be afflicted for 400 years. But I will bring judgment on the nations that they serve, and afterward they will come out with great possessions. As for you, go to your fathers in peace." So, again, the thing that's happening here is God is calling his shots, right? And so, all of the dynamic omniscience people are out to lunch and not dealing with the text as what it is. Like, God knows what's going to happen, and that's what he's doing, and he's using that to connect Abram with his descendants and what they're going to be going through, and so that they can know that they can know who he is, right? Which is not something that I've mentioned recently, but it's something that I had talked about whenever we did Genesis before. But there's a big discussion about does Abraham know the actual name of God as Yahweh, right? Because Moses asks, like, well, like, what is your name, right? And a lot of times earlier through this, right, they're going to refer to him as the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, the God of Jacob, right? And it's sort of this indication that they don't really know who this God is, and which is also why there's like that connection between this God and the fact that he's the one that took you out of this place, right? It's his actions that end up defining him more than like the specific name, right? And so there's a little bit of debate there, right? If you're taking the text at face value, right, it says, "I am the Lord," right? So it says, "I am Yahweh who brought you from all of this stuff," right? And so you would think that, like, okay, Abraham does know it, and then you would come to the conclusion that just while they're in that 400 years, the Jews have more or less forgotten what God's name is, and then that's why he has to retell Moses, right? And so you can take that track, or you can take the track that it's an anachronism that Moses is writing in here, that it actually says the Lord, and it wasn't like a placeholder of what actually got told to Abram. And I'm okay with that, because then that would make a little bit more sense with what happened before with Melchizedek, where it's like, okay, I worship El Elyon, like the Most High, right? He's worshiping God via a title rather than as a personal name. Um, so that's a academic debate that doesn't necessarily need to be solved here. Exit out of that. And then the last thing that I want to highlight is this portion here where it says, "And as for you, you shall go to your fathers in peace." We're going to see this kind of repeatedly, but to me, it's like this is the ancient Israelite understanding of the afterlife. They did not just have this idea that there was no afterlife. They have an idea that somehow in the afterlife there's a reunification with our forefathers, which, by the way, they somewhat seem to relate to the actual place that you're buried, right? That seems to somehow be connected to it, which is why it's going to matter later on where Sarah gets married, and the fact that Abram is going to buy this cave that's basically going to serve as a family grave. And it's also why at the end of Genesis, Joseph wants his descendants to bring his bones with them up out of Egypt and to bury them back in the Promised Land. And so this idea that the ancient Israelites just didn't believe in an afterlife is just very clearly not true. Okay. Questions, comments, anything about all of the rest of the chapter? I know I did the first paragraph and then I did the last three, but they're kind of connected, so. And hi, Katie, you came late. I don't know what this is.
Sorry, I didn't realize I wasn't muted. Hi.
Hi.
I was late because I was looking at Pokemon cards at Kroger, but they were out.
I don't care. You don't have to give me the reason. This isn't school.
You're fired. You can no longer join these groups.
Yeah, exactly.
You have to have a better excuse than that.
Darn it!
I'm just messing around. I had a guy work for us many years ago who he showed up like 2 hours late to work, and he told me, "Sorry, man, I was braiding my daughter's hair." I was like, "You should have lied. You
No,
should
that's-
have lied."
That can take a while.
Anyways, you said about the last paragraph.
I mean,
Couple
about
paragraphs?
the last three paragraphs, because I didn't stop.
Well, okay. Well, I'd love to hear some commentary on verse 16. Maybe you did already, but I don't think I heard anything about it. In the fourth generation, your descendants will come back here, for the sin of the Amorites has not yet reached its full measure.
Yeah.
I find that passage, I've always found that really interesting. I think from my perspective, it speaks to the justice of God, that not only was he working through Israel as an agent of mercy, but he was also he was using them as a vessel of wrath in a sense. So
Oh,
anyways,
yeah.
I would love to hear your commentary on that and what your thoughts are on that.
Yeah, I mean, it's not much different from what you said on that. That's definitely what's going on here. That there is this there, right? So I've said it before about how one of the things that God does, and there's references to it in this entire passage, and there has been, but God uses time as a weapon, and part of the way that He does that is that time is a validation tool, right? Kind of in the same way that I said, like, okay, he's validating who he is, via the fact that he's predicting like what's going to happen, 400 years in advance. But it's also a validation tool because he's like, these people are going to be judged, right? He already knows that they're going to be judged, and he knows that their iniquity is going to increase, right? Like, if you have this dynamic omniscience, this open theistic view of God, where he doesn't know the future, right? Like his promise right here is fundamentally premised on the fact that the people that are here now are going to increase in wickedness. Not just they're going to like stay at the same level of wickedness as they are now. They're going to increase, right? And so like part of the reason why someone affirms the idea of dynamic omniscience or open theism is because they're trying to affirm free will. That's one of the ways that they're trying to do it, which I think a Molinist take is a better way of affirming free will. But that's what they're trying to. That's why they have that theological framework. But if you have that, there's nothing really to suggest that, oh, actually, for sure, like the Amorites are going to use their free will to do continuously worse and worse things. If you were to say that well, you kind of have to go with, well, God got lucky on his prediction for both sides, and then you end up with a very weird situation in which you have to start to surmise, well, did God try this whole plan thing with other people in other places, and it just didn't work out for whatever reason? Maybe he he chose Abram out of the land of the Chaldeans, but maybe 200 years prior he had chosen Frank in Gaul, and maybe Frank was really righteous, but it turns out that the barbarians in France weren't as bad as the Amorites, and so he abandoned that plan and he went with this plan. Like it becomes way more messy about how you need to think about God and what he's doing in these plans if you try to affirm this strange theological framework. So then that's kind of the only like different thing about where my head goes, but it's correct that of what you said about he's going to use the Israelites to judge the Amorites. And one of the things that will end up getting said later in the Pentateuch is that the same thing is going to happen with the exile, right? Basically, what's going to happen in the exile is actually a similar thing to what God is doing to the Amorites here, right? Which is one of the things where I think it's why you can't make the argument that like God is commanding genocide, right? Because first of all, on a very fundamental like level, none of these groups are being genocided. They all like it's standard ancient Near Eastern warfare, and plenty of people survive and all that stuff. So basically what's happening, again, I'm repeating myself now, but basically what happens to the Amorites is going to happen to the Israelites, because their iniquity becomes too great, and so God ends up using a different nation to come and judge them.
Could I add something to that?
Yeah.
And I want to get your thoughts because I see this thought among Jewish people actually, where they have this idea that somehow they can um, undo the pattern, and like suddenly their righteousness can now redeem them, and their righteousness is their pathway to justification or whatever they would call that, God's redemption. And they would go out and they would call their fellow Israelites back to Torah observance and everything else, which
Yep.
I'm not going to say all of that's bad, because I think obviously Torah is good. God
Right.
made Torah. But with, so I see like this, and it's sad to me because it's them relying on their own righteousness and their own works and pretending like somehow they can be different than all the Jewish generations that came before them.
Yes.
That
Yes.
somehow
Yeah.
they can be different than the Israelites who were put into exile.
Like the
That
entirety of the Old Testament. Yeah.
Yeah, and they don't realize like the purpose of these patterns is to give you a definitive sense of what is.
Yes.
And that's kind of where I'm going with this, is like sometimes people think the patterns can somehow be defied, and yet they're kind of like divine patterns.
Yeah. Oh, for
And
sure.
I don't and yeah, just like you said, it's like what happened to the Amorites then turns around and happens to the Israelites. And even Paul, I think, tapped into kind of like this uh this analogical way in which God works with all of the nations. He talks about, he applies I think the passage of Hosea to the Gentiles.
Mm-hmm.
And from what I've read, a lot of theologians believe he applied that analogically, where he's like, hey, just as God said, you're not my people, you're going to be my people. Well, God's doing that with the Gentiles now.
Yeah.
And so anyways,
it's also related to this idea of like, right, like, because there are some Jews that have this idea of like chosen people means like we're special, right? Which also there's non-Jews that think that's what it means, and that's not what it means, right? It means chosen for service to be a nation of priests. That's what it means, because there's supposed to be a signal about who God is. The part of the point of what I'm saying here about the fact that what's going to happen to the Amorites is going to happen to them, it is to also make the point of there's actually nothing special about the Jews. Right, like you weren't chosen because you were a great nation, because you were great people. In fact, you were the least of all people, right? That's what it says. Like you were chosen because you were basically nothing. Like,
well, some of them act like they're extra special because they're chosen, and I'm
yes,
like,
exactly.
stop.
And
Do you realize that you've been under God's judgment for thousands of years?
Right, and the to what we're saying, like I think like the point of their entire recorded history is to make that argument, right? Like yes, you should, on a personal level, like if you were a Jew, I would advocate that, yeah, you should return to Torah observance as much as you can, which you can't do a lot of because the temple's not there, right?
Right.
Like your Torah observance is already
It's actually
limited
kind of
into
funny
what
because
it can actually be.
but of course, I'm going to tell you the Talmud is the oral
Right.
is the oral transmission from Sinai.
And so like it's like you're like, you can do that for your family and for your community, and it will make things better for your family and for your community, and so that is a good thing to advocate for. But the the point of the text as a whole is to illustrate the fact that any effort that the Jews make, which is also one of the reasons why I don't really agree with post-millennialism, is like any effort that you make under your own power to establish like the messianic age, right? Because that's sort of what we're talking about here. Like it won't happen. It's not going to happen. That's the entirety of that's
They're
what
gonna
the Old
usher
Testament's
in.
about.
They'll usher in the false prophet and the false Christ.
Right.
That's
Exactly.
what's gonna happen.
Yeah. It's like that's what you're going to manage to bring about. And I don't see this is, again, talking about the post millennial stuff. I don't see why that would be any different for Christians. Like I don't like again, the Jews shouldn't really think that they're special. I don't think Christians should really think that they're super special either. Like I don't think that we're going to bring about a Christian utopia on Earth either. We've done a perfectly good job of killing each other for the past 2,000 years. Like I don't think we're going to manage to bring that about. The closest we've come is America, and it seems like most of these people that adhere to kind of the theomany view, a Christian nationalist view, kind of hate America. So
Yeah.
and they don't like the fact that America is open to pluralistic Christian denominations, right? Which to me I think is actually a thing that America has done correctly.
I mean, it's not gonna happen. We're not gonna have Christian nationalism.
No.
There's way too much secularism. You know, there's way too many secularists in this nation. But
Well,
even if we did have a Christian nationalist system or something along theocracy or something along those lines, it's a little bit scary because you're like, which side wins?
well,
Like, is it going to be the
this
Eastern Orthodox,
right. This is
or the
my argument,
Catholics,
right?
or
It's like
yeah.
even back whenever a majority of the nation wasn't secular, let's say let's pretend that we go back 100 200 years to whenever a majority of the nation isn't secular. That doesn't mean that we're all the same. And like at the founding,
Exactly.
we had different states that were different denominations and they did not get along. And we had established state churches, and their requirement was you needed to be Quaker or whatever, like it was, or you needed to get out of Pennsylvania and you needed to get out of Massachusetts, right? It's not going to happen now. Like you're not going to get to anything. You're not going to get to anything close to that for I don't think ever, but
Nor is it
really
the solution.
No, and nor is it the solution. Correct. It's not even a plausible solution of what it is we're actually trying to achieve.
I think like all these systems, including the covenants that we're talking about and various governmental systems, all kind of point in one direction.
Oh yeah,
Right? They all point to the leadership of Christ in his perfect covenant. It's like, and okay, on that point, on the covenant covenant subject. By the way, Kate, if you want to hop in here, you have any questions? I don't want to hog the time.
You're good. You're good.
Okay, so in terms of covenants, you're talking about conditional versus unconditional.
Mm-hmm.
I have a proposition that I'll just be honest with you. I don't trust myself enough to go ahead and just throw this out there and teach people, but I want to ask you your thoughts on it. Is I tend to see almost like when God sets forth every one of his covenants, whether it's the Abrahamic covenant, the Mosaic covenant, or the Davidic covenant, and if there are other covenants, those are the three main ones I can think of that clearly point towards Christ. I tend to see a conditional and an unconditional aspect to them, like where God is making certain promises guaranteed, and
Yeah.
then he's attaching these unconditional elements to him, where it can be confusing at first. Like, why do you have both elements? Like, for example, even with the Davidic covenant, God's like, hey, and if your sons will obey me and blah blah blah, then I'll establish your throne forever. And then he's kind of like, but I'll establish your throne forever no matter what.
Yeah. 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 Yeah.
And
Yeah. Yeah.
um and so, like, there's that going on, and I have some thoughts as to why God does it. I think he uses it to, I think it begs the question in some ways, like, well, what is it going to take for us to get to that?
Yep. Yes. Yep.
Like,
I think. Yep. I think that's true.
I think God is causing us, it begs the question. I think it creates a wondering, why is, well, like,
He's
how are we
he's
going to achieve?
he's
What's that?
creating a Messiah shaped hole. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Well, exactly. There you go. So that's my theory. You can
Yeah.
tell me
So
I'm
I mean the main thing that I would add, like, I agree with that. I think that's exactly what's going on. I like for what I was just trying to say. I think that the entirety of the Old Testament in general is trying to point at this idea that there is a need for there's a need for the Messiah, and there's a need for the Messiah in a way that, like, human beings weren't even really fully conscious of, that the Messiah was there, right? Like, the Messiah is not a, like, super explicit thing from the beginning, right? Like, we're going through Genesis, like, there's not really, like, this specific highlighted thing of, like, oh yeah, and one day, like, there's going to be the Messiah. Like, there's very vague, like, your offspring will crush the head of the serpent, like, language, and but also just the text isn't that in general. It's a narrative structure, and so what it's doing is it's using this narrative structure to describe the world and to describe how human beings act in the world, both righteous human beings and unrighteous human beings, right? Both people that follow Yahweh and people that try to make a name for themselves, like these two different camps that I've been talking about. Like, it's describing those, and by describing those and describing those hierarchies, it's laying out the fact that really nothing works. Like man, both paths don't fully get there in either capacity, and so there's this need for there to be something else, and that gets picked up on by Second Temple thinkers and theologians, and that's where you start to develop this idea of the Messiah of Mashiach. That's where it comes from.
you see it, you
Right.
really see it, like, highlighted in the prophets. Like,
Yeah, exactly.
they basically take Torah
Yep,
and they say, how is this going to happen?
exactly. Exactly.
How, like, and then you get these um very new covenant promises.
Yep.
At least we would recognize them as new covenant, where,
Yeah.
I mean, they're all throughout Ezekiel. I mean, I just went through Ezekiel pretty recently, pretty quickly, and I was like, I actually went through and I was underlining. I couldn't believe how many times God says, he doesn't just say new covenant, he says, my covenant of peace. He constantly calls it the covenant of peace, which is really kind of interesting. But it's like the prophets, you can almost hear the prophets groaning, like, you've made all these promises. You said this is going to happen. And yet we're cursed people.
And so, okay, and so now we can tie it back to
Yeah.
this chapter. Where's our guarantee? right?
Mm,
Like,
yeah,
what's
that's
like
good.
you've said that this is going to happen,
That's really
but
good.
we're
Yeah.
not seeing it right now in our lives. What's the guarantee? And so what does Paul call Jesus? He's like, he's the first fruits of the resurrection, right? Like they have this eschatological vision of the resurrection that they develop, right? Of like, okay, like,
Yes.
what would be like the ideal world, right? And they start coming up with like these ideas of like what it means to live in the age to come and like all of that stuff, right? And it's like, okay, well, what's our guarantee? How do we know that that's going to happen? And that's what Christ is. Christ is the guarantee. He's the way that and right. And what is Christ doing there? Christ is establishing his own covenant, right? He's establishing his own covenant where he's the guarantor of what is
Mm,
going to occur, right? Like that's what's happening. And this is what I'm trying to say with this whole thing about like these are many stories of like the rest of the Pentateuch, or sorry, the rest of the Bible, right? Because everything that we're saying here is New Testament stuff, obviously. But the only other thing that I was going to say with what you're talking about, right, is conditional versus unconditional, right? I think the reason that God does that is because fundamentally God is relational, right? God's a father, right? And like as soon as you start, I think as soon as you put it in that frame, you can understand why the covenants have both conditional and unconditional conditions on them. Because like this is how you deal with your kids, right? Like you might establish something with your kids, right? And you go, hey, like when you're 16, I will buy you a car, right? And you tell them that whenever they're I don't know 14, right? But then whenever they're 15, they've been acting up, and so you tell them, hey, I will buy you a car if you do your chores and get good grades and all this stuff and yada 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 yada, right? And then it turns out that they didn't do that, and they get to 16, and you don't get them a car, and they get upset and all this stuff, and it's like, oh, you didn't keep your word. And then a week later, you get them a car, but it's not as nice because actually you realize that like, you know, you do care about them and you do love them and all this stuff, and you want them to have a vehicle, but it's not as nice as a vehicle as you would have got them if they had actually been like doing all the stuff that they had been doing all along, right? And like obviously that analogy doesn't go map 1-to-1 onto how I think God is functioning, but the underlying discussion shouldn't be that strange to us, right? In our normal relations with how we deal with relatives, we have unspoken conditional aspect. We have unspoken conditions. We have spoken conditions. We have unconditional aspects to our agreements that we make. We have unconditional aspects that like we break because we're not perfect, right? And all this stuff. So like it like this is why I have the problem of this rule that people try to place on covenants to be like, oh, well, if a covenant is mentioned in the Bible and there's no conditions mentioned, well, there actually are conditions. They just weren't mentioned. And my thing is like, if you can make up a rule like that, I can make up a rule too, which actually is that, well, when God makes covenants and they have conditions on them, even if he says those conditions, God can actually change it and make it unconditional at any point that he wants to, right?
Well, can I add something to that? So, like for example, one of the conditions of the Mosaic covenant is that they obey the law, right? I mean, that's kind of like the main condition.
Yeah.
You have to obey the law. And so, what do Ezekiel and Jeremiah say? They say, "Hey, God has a solution. He's going to write his law in your hearts,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
and then you're going to do his law." It's as simple as that. And it's like, well, then that means that the Mosaic law is actually honored and fulfilled. It's not erased per se, it's honored and fulfilled.
Mm-hmm.
And so the covenant didn't change. Just the full picture wasn't presented yet. How God was the mechanism by which God would do that.
Right.
So
Well, you
sometimes
also
it's
have
not
when did that
just,
happen?
yeah. What's that?
You also have the question of when did that happen? When did God write the law in people's hearts, or has that not happened yet?
Who asks that?
Well, I mean, to me, that's the open question about that. What that passage brings up, because like if you're still a Jew, right, you have to ask that question, right? Of like, okay, is it written on people's hearts, or has that not happened yet?
Well, I kind of another theory is I think that there's still a work of I think God's not complete with us, and that part of that law writing has to take place on our bodies potentially, and that's why we need resurrected bodies, redeemed bodies, because our bodies, in a sense, are the things that are law breaking by nature, or not law breaking, maybe law breaking. I don't know. I don't have the perfect terminology. Paul
I don't
talks
think I
about
would
how
agree with that, but okay,
you need to agree with it.
okay.
Okay, good.
Well, now you're kicked out.
No, what do you think? No, well, what do you think about that?
I mean, I've always taken it that that passage is referring to the fact that we have the Holy Spirit now,
Oh yeah, I agree with that.
and
Yeah.
um, and so I think it's fulfilled in that way. But like many things, dealing with God's promises, I think there's partial fulfillments. We get that we have that in Genesis, right? Um,
Yes.
we have a partial fulfillment of the blessing to the nations in the story of Joseph, but it's not a full fulfillment, which full fulfillment doesn't come through until Jesus, right? Um,
Yeah.
but even with Jesus, right, we have a partial fulfillment because we're not in the eschaton, right? And like that's going to be the full fulfillment of everything, right? Um, and so there, with all of these things, I think there's forms of partial fulfillment with a larger fulfillment later, um, which to me goes into some of like that discussion of what we just said of like, um, there's like an unconditionality portion to a lot of these like promises of like, okay, like you do this thing and it'll be like fulfilled, and so like the covenant will kind of be fulfilled for a little bit, but there's like an unconditional portion that's like out in the future where like it's going to be fulfilled more totally. Um,
Well, you just said it better than me. You virtually said what I was trying to say is that
yeah.
there's kind of like a partial, there's like the first fruits, I guess, or down
Yep.
payment,
Yep.
but it's not, we have new covenant. It's not that we get like, you know, baby version of the new covenant. I
Yeah.
mean,
No.
we have the new covenant. It's just, I don't know that it's, been that we're experiencing everything that the new covenant has for us in its
Yes.
fullness yet.
Yes. Yeah. I the way that I like think about it is like it's it's a window frame, right? And so like whenever you're looking through a window frame, like you're seeing the outside, right? Like it's not like a fake outside. Like you're seeing the outside. It's just you can't see all of the outside because there's a frame around it, right?
Mm.
And so until the
Mhm.
frame is gone, you can't see all of the outside, right? And so
Mhm.
like we still have because we're mortal and because we're existing in the time and place that we have the frame of mortality, and so that is limiting our view of the eschaton. But that doesn't mean that we're not seeing the eschaton, like, and that we're not experiencing it. We really are like, I think when
I agree.
I think that's why, like, you can say, like, the kingdom of God is at hand, like the kingdom is here, like it is here, like it's here.
Yeah.
It's just that there's a frame around it. That's the only issue.
Is that connected to what Paul was saying with the, like, we see now as in a mirror, but then we shall
dimly,
see face to face?
yes, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. It's just my attempt to say it in a slightly different way of the same thing that he's saying. Yeah. Yep. I'm gonna end it there because I need to end the recording at some point.
Am I officially kicked out of the group?
Yes.